Okay, and we're back to talk about Aristotle. So, Aristotle, student of Plato, interested in what Plato did, but in changing it a little bit because, much like most of us who have gone through the process of going through the academy, he did not like his his dissertation advisor. That's how I like to put it. He did not like Plato because Plato had no faith in the human condition and in humanity to believe that humans could do good. Plato argued that rhetoric was bad because it could be used for unethical reasons. Aristotle stated that that was impossible. If a person used rhetoric for bad reasons, if they lied, if they weren't knowledgeable about the subject for which they were speaking, if they did anything negative with rhetoric, then it wasn't rhetoric. That's a pretty simple and easy answer. Look, if somebody lies, they're not practicing rhetoric. Kind of like when Plato said, if it's not me speaking, it's not philosophy. We all know that was not the case, just like we all know that it's not the case that you can't use rhetoric for, let's say, nefarious means. However, the tool of rhetoric being used for nefarious reasons is not the same as what Aristotle said rhetoric was. To him, that would be persuasion for the wrong reasons. In fact, it would be coercion, really, in his mind. Rhetoric can only be rhetoric if it's coming from a person who is worthy of speaking. And so Aristotle comes to us with this idea that rhetoric requires ethics. It requires an ethical movement from one end of a spectrum to another, from inaction to action, etc. What he does not believe is that rhetoric could be used for evil because a person who is a good person and worthy of speaking would never use it for evil. This becomes important later, particularly in the Roman period. But for our purposes, in looking just at Aristotle, his answer to Plato's claim that the only way to find truth is through dialectic was to say that no, the only way to get truth, to discover truth, is through rhetoric and dialectic. In fact, they have to work together. He said that rhetoric is the counterpart to dialectic. In other words, that dialectic is pretty much useless without rhetoric, and rhetoric is useless without dialectic. In short, that you must know the truth and then you must speak the truth in order for the truth to be enlightened. Therefore, most of the time we say that Aristotle is talking about a small t truth, a truth that exists only in the combination of the human experience with the reasoned, with reason. And so if I go over and bang my head on the wall 15 times and I say that hurts, it is reasonable to suggest that I should not, in fact, bang my head on the wall. We can go back and forth and talk about whether or not pain is good therapy. For example, right now, I've had 2 crowns put on right here yesterday. And I know it's efficient, but never have 2 crowns put on your teeth in the same day. It's just not a good idea, even though they're right next to each other. The drilling and such has made my jaw is no longer swollen, but it's certainly sore, and it's made my teeth sore. That combination of things is pretty painful, and I've taken all the pain medicine that I can take because, obviously I don't have a prescribed painkiller. I obviously don't do illegal drugs, and I'm only allowed to have Tylenol and not ibuprofen. So actually, right now, I really do want to go bang my head off of the blue wall right there because maybe it would take the pain away from my jaw. So it's debatable. That doesn't mean that the question of fact of whether or not banging your head against a wall hurts is true or untrue or bad or good. It just merely suggests that it's a question of fact that is in fact debatable. So Aristotle understood this maybe a little bit better than Plato, who would suggest that if you told somebody to bang their head on a wall in order to solve the pain that was somewhere else in their body, that you were telling them to do a negative thing, which is to say hurt themselves or cause pain. That would be bad. Maybe, or maybe there's a benefit, is what Aristotle is sort of saying. So maybe rhetoric isn't perfect or ideal, but there's a benefit to it. And so he teaches us how to practice it. Aristotle was really our first political scientist. Most people don't know that, but he taught us that the job of a rhetorician was to explain the government to the citizenry. That was the job of the rhetorician. So if that was the job of the rhetorician, then political science really shouldn't be necessarily about the behavior of people or policy as much as it should be about the knowledge of citizens for the purpose of participating in government. That only works in terms of a direct democracy, which, really has not ever existed. And so the ideal form of democracy requires the ideal form of communication, that is to say, the ideal form of rhetoric, and that simply does not exist. So what kind of rhetoric did Aristotle talk about? What were his rules or his practice for it? Well, you learn later that there are 5 what they call canons of rhetoric, right? We learn about invention, arrangement, style, memory, and delivery. And Aristotle sort of mentions all these kind of sort of, but really his big one is invention. He puts it first and he says that invention is the most important thing that you need to know and grasp and understand in order to be a good rhetorician. Invention implies that humans can create something. In this case, creating a message for the purpose of influence based on not just our knowledge, but on several things. Let's break down what those things are. It's true, we could spend hours talking about the topoi, but those are sort of outdated in a lot of ways. Maybe we should get back to them. I'm willing to entertain the idea. But for now, what I want you to concentrate on is what we attempt to concentrate on in sort of everyday communications, particularly in our public speaking experience. I did not say mediated, I said public. Aristotle was talking about mass influence. He was not talking about one-on-one influence. If you go downtown or out on a date and you convince somebody to do something with you, or you convince a friend to go see a movie they really, really, really don't want to see, that is not good rhetoric. That is you persuading somebody to do something. That's a one-on-one interpersonal action. That is not what Aristotle would define as mass influence and therefore rhetoric. Invention is the process of understanding all of the means of persuasion and coming up with the message to present to them. What is it that they want to hear? Now, certainly arrangement coming second is very, very important, but for right now, focusing on invention, we're focusing on where our argument comes from. Aristotle talks about 2 types of reasoning, inductive and deductive. I'm sure you're all familiar with it. He talks about fallacy, but he talks about a type of argument that he claims is the most popular kind of argument. I know what you're all thinking, it's syllogism, but that's incorrect. Aristotle said that the most popular or the most used type of argument is the enthymematic argument, the enthymeme, not a truncated syllogism, but an argument where one or more of the premises are assumed to be true. And so if you think about it, anytime that public policy is discussed in the public discourse, it's discussed under the idea that we assume certain things to be generally accepted or true. Somebody flew planes into the Twin Towers on 9/11, therefore we should attack Afghanistan, is certainly missing some of the premises before we get to the conclusion. But we don't discuss those. We assume them to be true. We assume in America we agree with an eye for an eye. We assume that retaliation is an appropriate response. We assume that equal retaliation is an appropriate response. We assumed that Afghanistan was responsible because we would never attack another country that didn't deserve to be attacked. All of these assumptions were placed into that one statement They attacked us, therefore we should attack them, which then grew into, if you don't believe that we should go into Afghanistan, you're un-American. You're either with us or you're against us. We like to put things into binaries because those are the easiest ways to make an thematic argument. So Aristotle doesn't say, hey, you should break down every single premise that people are working with, but understanding what premises your audience might have, you will actually be more effective. And so in that creation of argument, there's a minimum of 3 things that you have to be successful at in order to successfully persuade. First, you have to understand that people need proof. I'm not just talking about evidence, but I'm talking about proof. Proof that they can believe you, because the first thing that you're trying to do is get people to listen to you. And the second thing that you're trying to do is to get people to believe that what you're telling them is true. And that all happens long before you're actually persuading them or influencing them. And so there's 2 kinds of proofs generally, the artificial and the inartificial. Inartificial are pretty easy for us. They're those things which do not need to be reasoned. That wall is blue. Okay, yes, we could debate it, but why bother? The lights are on. The sun does not rise in the east, but the earth turns in such a way that it appears that the sun rises in the east. These are all things that we accept to be true. These are things we probably do not have to debate. However, those inartificial proofs over time have changed, because for Aristotle, they included things like words spoken under duress. We all know we can lie under duress. Contracts, they can be broken. But for the most part, knowing what we call science or statistics or data as undeniable is what Aristotle was referring to as inartificial proofs. Artificial proofs are where we really need to focus our time. And I'm actually going to do that in the next video and break this video up a little bit. Those artificial proofs, proofs created by humans, proofs created by the speaker, that's what we're interested in, and that's coming up next.